So I think those kind of people, those ruling class wannabes, they've always been around. They probably always will be around, and we will always have to resist them.
What's up, everybody? My guest today is Tom Naughton. Tom is a writer, director, stand up comedian, and documentary filmmaker. Probably most known for his documentary film Fathead, which is a hilarious repudiation of Morgan Spurlock, rest in peace, documentary Supersize Me. Tom, it's an honor to have you on the show, man.
Thank you. I haven't done one of these in a long time because I kind of let my blog go dormant and have moved on to other things. So it's been a while since I've done one of these.
Okay, cool. Well, I definitely had you in mind because, believe it or not, the Fathead movie is probably. This sounds kind of odd to say, but like if I could credit one thing to sort of shaping my libertarian worldview, this movie would probably be on the top 5 list. Honestly,
Oh,
man, like it was impressive to watch. So if anybody hasn't seen this movie, I suggest after this interview, maybe you should go check it out. So
yeah, it's used to be on Netflix. It's now on Amazon Prime, so that's the best place to find it.
Okay, cool. Amazon Prime. So, yeah, so basically the premise of the movie is you set out to dispel the myths that are put forward in Supersize Me, which, if anybody's not familiar, that is Morgan Spurlock's documentary where he tries to prove how unhealthy McDonald's is by eating it 3 times a day. And,
Hmm.
predictably, he gains a ton of weight, becomes super unhealthy. But you set out to completely shatter that narrative, and you set out to do the exact same thing, but to do it how you put it was with a functioning brain. I believe that's what she said. And
Yes, I do have a functioning brain. Morgan Spurlock is, or well, should say, was a good entertainer, but he was also, as I often say in the film, full of baloney. It was a very dishonest film, entertaining, but very dishonest. In fact, I found out later, as we all found out a few years ago, it was even more dishonest than we thought. Um, so I set out to show that, see, in addition to other careers I've had, I am a computer programmer. So, and that's actually what I do for a living now, although I'm about to retire. You don't want to throw math at me that doesn't add up and expect me not to notice. So, I was kind of familiar with what the kind of calorie counts are at McDonald's meals. And he said, I'm only going to supersize if they ask me. And then it said in the credits, they only asked him to supersize 9 times in an entire month. So basically twice a week. But then twice in that film, his nutritionist told him, well, Morgan, you're consuming 5,000 calories a day. And he also said he was going to eat everything on the menu. That includes things like chicken salads. And immediately I thought, there's no way that a guy eating just 3 meals a day and only supersizing if they ask gets to 5,000 calories a day. In fact, I demonstrated in Fathead, I did 2 supersized meals in a day, and I added a couple desserts, and I got up to about 4,200. So right away, I knew, no, this guy didn't follow his rules. He absolutely stuffed himself way more than his rules would have allowed because he wanted to gain weight. Because if he didn't gain weight, what kind of film does he have? But when I say it was even more dishonest than we thought, he revealed a few years ago that he had been an alcoholic since his teenage years. He actually said, I haven't spent 1 week sober since I was, I don't know, 15 or 16 or whatever he said. Well, there was a scene in Supersize Me where he's getting a checkup from a doctor, and the doctor says, oh, your liver, it looks like an alcoholic's.
huh,
And Spurlock let that go as if, see what McDonald's meals did to me. I now have a liver like an alcoholic's. Well, as it turned out, the reason his liver looked like an alcoholic's was because he was an alcoholic. I mean, that alone tells you everything you need to know about this guy's not an honest filmmaker. And in addition to that, I lived in LA at the time I made Fathead. I knew people who were peripherally or directly involved in the business. And I met a woman who had been tapped for one of his 30 days episodes. And she told me they made it clear, well, we've already decided what the outcome is going to be, and we expect you to just play along. So a guy supposedly making documentaries, but he's already decided what the conclusion's going to be. She's just supposed to play along. To her credit, she refused, so she didn't end up in that episode. But Fathead began with me saying, this guy's film is entertaining, but it's full of nonsense. I'm going to take that on. And that's kind of what part one of Fathead is. But then when I had decided I'm going to go on my own fast food diet, I thought, well, I better start doing some research into nutrition so I understand what this will do to me. And that's when I found, the more I dug, the nutrition advice that we've been given by governments and big health agencies for years is also nonsense. So part two of the film is kind of demonstrating, hey, you were told red meat will kill you, don't eat egg yolks, all that. Yeah, that was never based on real science. It's nonsense.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and that's why I think it's a very important film. It's 15 years old, but it
Yeah,
still holds up today. And actually, that's actually the reason why I have two copies here. And
I wondered about that.
there's a few more copies around here somewhere. Actually, about a decade ago, my wife bought multiple copies of the DVD to
Oh,
give to
wow.
people that thought that she thought might needed help with nutrition advice
Oh,
because like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. But like
right.
honestly, man, this film it's not only very informative, but it's hilarious. Like you learn a lot when you watch it, and you laugh your ass off while you're doing it, man. It's really well done. So congratulations on the film. Um,
Well, thank you. And Super Size Me, like I said, it was full of nonsense, but it was entertaining. And since I had a background at the
well, this
time
one's
as a
funnier,
stand-up,
honestly. Like Super Size Me is nothing compared to this. Like this one is
wow.
actually hilarious. So
Well, I appreciate that. Since I did used to be a stand-up comedian, I thought if I'm going to make a reply to him, my reply should be funny
yeah,
and amusing, truthful, informative, but also funny. So that's what I set out to do. So thank you for saying that.
no problem. And you mentioned something about how Super Size Me was like he already had his conclusion set out, like he had his mind made up about what he was going to present.
Sure.
Did you have like a similar thought process going into Fathead? Like, were you confident that you were going to be able to? I don't want to spoil the end of the movie, but you eat nothing but McDonald's for a month and like
I ate
other
nothing
fast
but
food.
fast food for a month. I
Yes,
decided not to
absolutely,
strictly limit it to McDonald's.
for sure. But
I I suspected what the result was going to be. Um, I wasn't sure what it was going to be. Keep in mind, I was limiting myself to 2,000 calories. I was limiting, not eliminating, but I was limiting my carbohydrates. And I had known from losing weight before that that seemed to kind of work for me. Um, and I had not been on, I had not been following those rules for a while before I made the film. So I tend to gain weight fairly easily. So, um, I'd put on some weight, and I thought if I go on this diet, I'm pretty sure I'm going to lose it. I wasn't real sure what the other health parameters were going to turn out to be. That's why I went to a doctor and got a checkup before and after. I was pleased with the results. So was the doctor. I think you may recall he said, "I don't like what you're proving here."
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
that was very funny.
so I had no idea what those lab results were going to be until they came in, but it worked out well.
Okay, well, that's a good segue into the lies that we've been led to believe about
Hmm.
just nutrition in general and the food pyramid that I learned as a child. Like
Yeah.
I'm a child of the like mid to late 1980s. So like when I was going to school in the early 90s, great memory, great time to be alive, but the food advice we were given in school is absolute nonsense. Like I'm thinking back to learning the food pyramid in school, and the whole thing is like, what do they recommend? Like 11 servings of grain or something? Like is like your base layer of what you're supposed to feed a child, and um,
Yeah, it was
so
six to 11. Yeah, 6 to 11 servings of grains per day.
yeah, so like at the end of Fathead, where they went over your cholesterol.
Hmm.
Do you want to explain to people like how like what those numbers meant? Because like yes, you did gain cholesterol, but like cholesterol isn't the demon that it's made out to be. Like your
No,
levels of good cholesterol were actually way up, and you turned out to
right.
be a lot healthier with your fast food diet.
Right. The total cholesterol number is still tested a lot. If you go get a checkup, they're going to test that. It's really kind of meaningless because saying you have too much cholesterol is like saying you have too many cells in your body. Well, are we talking brain cells, muscle cells, or cancer cells? So, cholesterol is not just cholesterol. There's HDL, which is generally considered protective. And even with LDL, the supposed bad one, well, it makes a difference. Is the LDL in a small, dense form, or is it in a large, fluffy form? I have quote unquote high LDL, but I got a full lipid panel where they look at particle size and everything else. I sent it to a doctor friend of mine who's a cardiologist and very versed on this stuff. And he called me and went over the numbers and he pointed to certain things and said, "You are making LDL that is almost exclusively the large fluffy kind. It's not only not harmful, it's protective. People who make a lot of large fluffy LDL are less prone to infections. They're less prone to developing cancers, et cetera, et cetera." And on my blog at one point, I dug into data that I pulled from the American Heart Association website. And their own data, when I analyzed it, showed that people with quote unquote high LDL are no more likely to die of a heart attack than people with low LDL. And yet they still push that nonsense. So it was really eye opening when I was doing the research for Fathead and I was coming across these studies, and then that would lead to another one, and that would lead to another one. And these are high quality, published studies. And I think my wife got tired of me yelling from across the room, "Honey, we've been lied to." So it was, yeah, it was a real turnaround for me, not just in terms of making the film, but finally, I think getting a handle on what a good diet should be. Because before, I was trying to do the low fat thing and I was cutting back on meat and all that stuff. And it's interesting. You said you were a child of the 80s, which is when a lot of this bad advice really started coming along. Well, I was a child of the 60s. I'm 66 years old. And I remember when I was in high school, first off, nobody ever said low fat anything. Nobody ever recommended low fat. And I remember having a health class in high school, and the teacher was a guy who also happened to be the wrestling coach. So he had, as wrestling coaches do, coached a lot of guys into getting their weight down into the weight class that they needed to be in, to the ideal weight class for their strength. And I remember him telling us in health class, if you guys need to lose weight, cut back on sugar, cut back on bread and, other things made with flour. Stop eating French fries, limit how many potatoes you eat. For him, it was all about limiting sugars and starches, especially processed starches. Well, there's two types of knowledge that we deal with in these subjects. There's the academic theoretical knowledge, people who just go to school and they are taught things and they regurgitate them. And then there's real world knowledge, people whose knowledge comes from actual results. Well, this guy's knowledge came from actual results. Again, as a wrestling coach, he's coaching guys into losing weight so they can get in the proper class. So he was basing his knowledge on years of experience and results. He never said anything about going on a low fat diet. It was stop eating sugar, stop eating processed flours and other junk starches. That was the more or less standard advice in the 70s. Another thing in the 70s, again, this is the advantage of being old. I remember going to see a comedy movie called Silver Streak. It was Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor. It was a funny movie. They were on a train. A lot of the movie takes place on a train, and there were two characters who were there for laughs. They were big fat guys. And at one point, it showed the big fat guys ordering the diet meal. What was the diet meal? It was a hamburger patty, cottage cheese, and tomato slices. And I'm old enough to remember you could go to a restaurant and that would be called something like the waist trimmer meal. Again, it wasn't low fat, it was no sugar, very limited carbohydrates. That was the standard advice for many, many years. You can watch old episodes of the Andy Griffith Show from the 50s where Barney's talking about, oh, you got to avoid those sugars and starches if you want to stay thin, blah, blah. But this is just stuff that people knew for decades and decades and decades. And it was based on experience. And then in the 80s, the experts came along and decided all that was wrong and we're going to change the advice. And gee, look how much healthier everyone is today, he said sarcastically.
Yeah, absolutely. It just, yeah, it really makes you think because if you ask anybody like my age, like if their grandparents are still kicking around, like they wouldn't have had none of this like no fat nonsense going on.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
it's really eye opening when you put it like that. And another thing too is like, what do you think is behind all of this? Because like it gets pretty alarming when you look at the quote unquote expert class giving
Mm-hmm.
you obviously wrong advice. Like still to
Right.
this day, you go to the grocery store and they're still like it's not pushed like in schools as much. Like they've
Right.
quietly walked back some of the bad advice, but you go through the grocery aisles and you still see low fat everything. And it just
Right.
seems to me like I know from experience like raising a family, like me and my wife aren't rich, we have kids we're trying to raise and it just seems everywhere you go, it's more expensive to eat healthy.
It
It's
is.
it
It
seems
is.
yeah, it seems like all of this junk food is tailored to people that can't afford the good stuff. You know what I mean?
Well, when you said where did all this come from, there were several reasons, but one of them was when the food stamp program, that's not the actual name. I think it has a different name, but it's the food stamp program. When they were budgeting that in the 80s, they did not want to break the budget by being too generous in their minds with what you'd be allowed to buy. And so since families on that budget, on the food stamp budget, couldn't really afford high quality food, it was a political decision to declare grains, which are one of the cheapest foods, to be health food, so that they could say, we are allowing people to eat healthy who are on the food stamp program. So they just kind of declared grains health food, which they're not. That's part of it. Another thing is, just as often happens in politics, something has been working for a long, long time, and certain people come along and they think we need to mix it up. We need to show we have new ideas. Um, it's what's the guy's name? Nassim Nicholas Taleb calls it neomania, falling in love with things just because they're new. So this was new, this whole low fat thing. It was new and exciting. And, we want to mix it up and not just give the same advice our grandparents gave, even though it worked. So it was that desire to find something new and better. And as often happens, people fall in love with their ideas. They ignore evidence that those ideas are wrong, and they just keep going with it. And it was a momentum thing. Now, as far as the grocery store, I will say I'm seeing evidence of positive change. I see more products in the grocery store now, specifically labeled low carb or keto. 10 years ago, I didn't see any of those. So they are realizing that, Mr. Market always votes last, right? I mean, if you're libertarian bent, you know that they can try to force things on you, but ultimately it's going to be the consumers that decide. So I don't look to the grocery stores to lead the charge. They're going to follow what people are willing to buy. And the fact that they're selling more low sugar, low carb, keto products tells me that they've done their research and they found that that's where the consumer demand is going. So the people at the top maybe not have not necessarily gotten it, but the people down where we are, the mass, they are getting it. And that's what's going to drive change. And it's already driving change.
Yeah, and that's a very positive thing to see because the expert class right now, I feel like they are sort of on the run a little bit
Hmm.
because a couple of decades ago it was pretty easy to lie to people. You know what I mean? Like people
Right,
didn't. I mean, of course, as you point out in the movie, it's always been free to go to the library. Anybody can
right,
go there and pick up a book and educate yourself. But I mean, now just with the proliferation of the internet,
right,
you have people like Joe Rogan. They've got a massive platform, and he brings on people who actually know their stuff, and they're going
right,
to reach millions of people, and they're just
right.
going to shatter all of these narratives. And you didn't have that before. I mean, like little old me has my own show for Christ's sakes. You know what I mean? Like it's easy to get information out now. So
Yeah,
in a way, that's a
exactly.
positive thing. Then that's going to drive change too.
And it is. And in fact, 4 or 5 years ago, 5 years ago, I was asked to deliver the keynote speech at the Weston A. Price Foundation annual meeting. And the speech I gave was called Diet, Health, and the Wisdom of Crowds. It's on YouTube. You can look it up. And it actually deals with this very subject. We have, again, the two ways of knowing things. There's the experts, what Thomas Sowell calls the anointed, whose ideas are very top down driven. They will impose their ideas using some sort of coercion if necessary. If their grand plan, their great idea turns out to not work, they never blame the plan. They always say, oh, it was undermined, or my favorite, it didn't go far enough, which means let's keep doing the same thing, but more of it. And then the other way of knowing things, which I contrasted in the speech, is the wisdom of crowds. It's the knowledge that bubbles up from all of us, from experience. Well, for the wisdom of crowds to really work, we have to have a way of sharing information. So we didn't have that back in the day. In fact, my first job out of college was as a writer for a small safety and health magazine. And guess what? I wrote articles on how you should go on a low fat diet, et cetera, because I had very limited sources. And that's what was coming from top down. And I was just repeating government advice or advice coming out of stupid places like Harvard. Um, well, now that we have the wisdom of crowds, people can share their experiences. So we have much more knowledge based on true experience. So it is because of the internet and the fact that it allows people to share information that we can get that kind of knowledge that bubbles up from the crowd, which is what we had way back in the day, by the way, not at any kind of national or international level, but when people lived in tribes in small towns, the advice came from talking with your fellow tribe members, with your neighbors, with your grandma. It was knowledge based on experience that was kind of spread among the crowd. And then it got replaced by the expert class. And like you said, the expert class, I think, is now on the run because just way too many people, and this is even pre COVID. I think COVID woke a lot of people up to the problems with the expert class, but even pre COVID, if a lot of people realize if I'm told over and over to go on a low fat diet, to do this, to do that, and I do it and I don't lose weight and my energy plummets and my health doesn't improve, maybe there's something wrong with that advice. And instead of now just going back to a doctor, nutritionist, getting the same advice, now they go online. They find people like you, like me, like Joe Rogan, like the gazillion health blogs out there and go, oh, I'm not the only one. Oh, look, this advice seems to work for a lot of people, even though it's not what the experts recommend. So that's, again, a very positive change.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so what was your experience like during COVID? Because as somebody who's like tuned into this world, and
Mhm.
you're obviously into health, and you've been very critical of the expert class, shall we call them?
Right. Yeah.
What was your experience like doing what you do during the COVID-19 pandemic specifically? Like this
Well,
was.
I'll break it into two parts. There's my personal experience, and then there was my experience trying to get the word out, where I ran into the censorship regime that was rising around COVID. Personally, I really felt I had an advantage going in because of all the research did during Fathead, I already knew just because health advice comes from your government doesn't mean it's correct. In fact, there's a very good chance it's wrong. I had done a fair amount of research, partly for the film, but more for my blog afterwards on how Big Pharma operates. And I saw how they finagled results in order to get statins approved. And I mean, statins are basically worthless for most people and harmful for a lot of them. But if you just go look at, their reported results, everything seems positive. So I was already aware of how dishonest Big Pharma was. I mean, Pfizer's been sued for or paid bigger fines, I think, than any company in history for fraud. And yet people still think, well, Pfizer produces, it must be good. So I was already aware going in not to trust necessarily what came from government health agencies, and very aware not to trust drugs that come from Big Pharma just because a study produced by them says it's safe or effective doesn't mean it is. And I was especially not going to trust a drug that came from them that went through the whole process in something like 6 months, which means it is impossible. It is literally impossible to know what the long-term effects are. You can't measure long-term effects in a 6-month study.
It's just that I don't mean to cut you off there, but that is the most egregious thing out of the whole thing, and the sycophants who like rabidly defend these people. Just I'm not talking about the expert class. I'm talking about the trust the experts crowd would just say, "Oh, well, the whole world stopped. Like all the scientists in the world, they put everything down and they focused on that." Okay, but they can't bend space and time. Like, it doesn't matter how many people were working on it. It doesn't matter how thorough they were. Like, you can't tell me that they've done their due diligence to find out what's going to happen in a couple of years. Nobody can do that. We don't have access to a time machine.
Exactly.
Sorry, Tom. You said something that really just like brought back a little something in me from a couple of years. I haven't thought about that perspective in a couple of years. Continue.
So personally, early on in the COVID hysteria, I looked at the results of the Princess cruise, where it was first, one of the first big infections. I read an analysis by a wonderful, truly honest scientist named John Ioannidis, where he analyzed it, and he showed that the death rate was less than 1%, far less than 1%. And this was a ship full of older people who, if anything, would have been more vulnerable. So I knew right away, we are not talking about the reemergence of the Spanish flu as much as they want to try to scare us into thinking it is. This is a disease that will kill some vulnerable people, but I have no reason to be afraid of it. And then I went to, I think it was a Johns Hopkins site, like calculate your odds of dying from COVID. And it basically asked your age, your gender, your height, your weight, do you smoke, and are you diabetic? So I put all that in, and it said my odds of dying from COVID were about 1 in 50,000. Now, I knew right away that my actual odds are less than that because I am much healthier than most people in my age class because of the way I manage my diet, because of the fact that I go to the gym and work out twice a week, that I don't eat foods that drive up my blood sugar. I don't eat white flour. I don't consume rancid so-called vegetable oils, which are actually chemically extracted seed oils. I mean, I'm one of those guys who is almost never sick. I haven't had a flu shot since the 90s. I also haven't had the flu since the 90s. So when they said 1 in 50,000, I thought, well, that would be for quote unquote normal people. In my demographic, my odds are going to be much lower. So when the whole, vaccine thing came along, my first thought was, I'm not going to take it for the simple reason that I don't need it. This disease isn't going to kill me, so I don't need it. Then you start hearing reports, even though they were trying to quash them, on things like blood clots and everything else. And I was just like, no way. There's absolutely no way I'm doing this. I didn't do it. My wife didn't do it. My kids didn't do it. And what's interesting is among our family, friends, workmates, I'd say a group of relative, I don't know, let's say it's 50 or 100 people I'd consider in my social circle. I think it was about half and half got the jab and didn't. And then, I just watched the results, and among the people who got the jab, they all got COVID anyway.
Yep.
Every single one of them got it anyway. They have had more reinfections. There's been a suspicious number of cancers in that group. So, I decided, no, I definitely made the right decision. I don't know anyone who didn't get the jab who says, oh, I so regret not getting it. I know plenty of people who did get it and say, gee, in retrospect, I wish I hadn't done that.
Yeah, see, I'm actually in that class, unfortunately, but I actually knew better. I was mandated to get it at work. Don't forget, you're talking to a Canadian here. Things
Yeah.
were absolutely nuts
Oh, yeah.
up here. Absolutely insane, dude.
Yeah.
Like,
no.
and the real ironic thing is, I ended up leaving that job this year. And, if I had anticipated the Freedom Convoy and just like how different things were going to be 6 months down the road, I probably would have told my boss to go fuck himself, but I didn't. And I just thought, hey, I'll just do it. It's 2 little shots. And the second one gave me a mild case of facial paralysis.
Oh,
It
wow.
wasn't like Bell's palsy or anything, but like, when you go to the dentist and they freeze your face,
Right.
I'm like, okay, that's normal. That's great. It went away after 3 days, but like, yeah. So now every time I get sick, every time I have like a weird pain in my back, I'm always going to wonder,
Right.
Yeah. So that's how it is up here. And
Yeah.
it's
No,
actually a big part of the reason why I started this show, because I would like a platform to talk about these things, and lest anything like this ever happens again, I want to be one of the ones speaking out against it. So,
well, the company I work for, which I won't mention by name, they also, you remember President Biden ordered all companies with, I think it was more than 100
yes,
employees.
the OSHA mandate, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Your employees must
Correct me if I'm wrong.
vaccinated.
I focus more on Canadian politics, but so like Biden, Kamala, they did the OSHA mandate. They're like the my body, my choice people, right? They're big on that.
Yeah,
They like to say my body, my choice.
yeah,
Okay, gotcha.
That's what they say.
Yeah.
So the word came down in a town hall over Zoom from our CEO that everyone had to go get the vaccine, and if you do not, we will consider it your resignation. And I think it was by like December 1st or something. But then I looked, and they did have a couple categories where you could request a exclusion, whatever you want to call it. One was religious reasons. The other was note from your doctor. So well, first off, I don't really know my doctor because I almost never go to the doctor. I think I've seen the guy once in like the last 5 years, maybe twice. I kind of didn't think he would sign it, the exemption. So, but I took the form to his office and I told his nurse, yeah, I would like him to sign this medical exemption. And if he doesn't, well, I'm going to lose my job, because I was not going to get the jab just to keep my job. I mean, I work in IT. We're in demand. If I had needed to find another job, I probably could have. Plus, I just wasn't going to take it. And much to my surprise, she took it back and came out, and he had signed it.
Wow.
So I turned in the exemption. He and I didn't talk about it. He didn't ask me why, but he signed it. So I had the medical exemption form in. And then, of course, later the whole mandate got struck down by courts. So, but I know a lot of people that I work with who I don't think would have gotten it otherwise. They did.
Oh, there's a good percentage of the population I feel wouldn't have got it otherwise, because I don't know how I didn't pay too close attention to the numbers in the States, but I can tell you that like Canadians we're a very like polite, submissive type of people generally. So I could tell you roughly it was about 65% of the people, I would say, like depending on what province you're in, they're a little bit more rebellious in Alberta. They might have had like 50%, like half of people. but I think like 60 to 70% of Canadians just did it. As soon as it became available to them, you had about 60 to 70% of the population that were just like, yep, no problem. Shoot those things into me, no questions asked.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you had the general mandates like the vaccine passports. As soon as word came down that like, you had to get it to go to a restaurant, like to sit down or like go to a movie theater or for God's sakes take your children to a sports event.
Right.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like you got another maybe 10% of the population, and then the federal work mandate got another like I don't know, 2.5 to 5%. So in the end like 15% of Canadians just didn't do it.
Right.
Yeah. So that's how it was up here.
It's in the States, it absolutely depends on what area you're in. I know in what we'd call blue areas, the compliance rate was very high. But even in red areas, I mean, I live in Tennessee, it's considered a red state. That means it was more like only 40% went out and did it, maybe 50%. So, yeah, I mean, the whole thing was just, I was just, during that whole thing, I was just thinking, this is Orwellian, and I can't believe people don't see it for what it is. This is a control mechanism. And well, my wife and I have talked about this. The good thing about all that is it's kind of made it obvious which of your friends, neighbors, and relatives kind of have the souls of Nazi collaborators.
Yeah, it's an
They
extreme
do what the
example, but
authorities
it's
say.
sort of true. You
Yeah,
know what I mean? It's sort of like, like God forbid there's I mean, this sort of thing doesn't happen overnight, but like if you ended up in like a sci-fi dystopian V for Vendetta type of movie or like
right,
you know what I mean, like we lived in like the USSR overnight, you'd
right.
the neighbors who would turn you in to the authorities and
Yeah,
point at your house, they've
yeah.
already identified themselves. So
That's
yeah, it's
exactly what we said about it. Yeah, it's like,
yeah.
well, at least we know, and we're sorry to say there are certain people I considered friends. There are a couple of relatives. I'm like, well, I still love them, but in a stuff hit the fan situation, I would no longer trust them.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
It got pretty creepy up here. Like I live in like the suburbs of a Canadian city. So like the bored soccer moms on our local Facebook group, it was like during that first lockdown, especially like they'd be taking pictures of people's kids. You know what I mean? Like we weren't allowed on walking trails, so like
yeah,
I'd log on to Facebook because I was off work because there's nothing else to do because we were locked down. And some lady had posted a picture of three children walking together on a walking trail, and they'd be like, "Look at these three kids, they're gathering." And then somebody would be like, "Those are my three kids. They are brother and sister. Like, take this picture down. You're being ridiculous." Like, people turned into wild animals during that time, man. Like, it was,
yeah.
yeah,
And
it
what
was,
was it? So that would be disgusting anyway.
yeah,
But it
of
was
course.
even more disgusting when we learned what a lot of us already suspected, which is the COVID virus does not live outdoors in fresh air. It does not live in sunshine. So, all these things closing beaches, parks, outdoor stadiums, they were closing places where people would not be spreading it because the sunshine and fresh air kill the virus. Then they ordered everyone indoors where they could spread it. And it was just, well, this is the whole thing. It gets back to why so many people are now kind of turning their backs on the expert class because this is what the so called experts told us to do. And they were wrong. And they weren't wrong once or twice, they were wrong over and over and over on this whole thing, which I think, and to me, this is ultimately a good thing for people to go, maybe I'll start doing my own research, talking to my friends, going online, trusting my own instincts instead of just doing what the experts are telling me.
Of course. And it's a very valid point that you just brought up was the whole thing about it doesn't spread outdoors, yet they were encouraging people to go inside. And,
Hmm.
these decisions actually killed a lot of people. I mean, most
Yeah.
famously was like, the disaster in New York when they like, what I mean? They put the COVID patients literally from the hospital into nursing homes and stuffed them
And
all together. We had a
yep.
similar situation happen here in Canada, in Quebec, although it got way less publicity than the New York debacle. But like at a certain point, you have to ask yourself if these are the experts, were these terrible decisions was this by design? Did they know what they were doing? Like it almost seemed like they were trying to hurt people, to get the numbers up, to drive,
Yeah. And I
or
don't
are
want to
they
get
just bumbling
paranoid.
idiots?
Yeah. I don't want to sound paranoid, but I'm just looking at this mathematically. Let's just say at each juncture, you could make a wrong decision or a right decision. If this was just people accidentally making the wrong decision, I can see it happening here or there. But when you make the wrong decision and then the next wrong decision and then the next wrong decision and then the next wrong decision, it's difficult to believe that you could be that. It's like, if you flipped a coin, that's like flipping a coin and you get heads 10 times in a row. Okay, something's wrong with that coin. that's
It's a
that's
loaded
very
coin.
unlikely. So it seems to me there had to be more than just people making bad decisions. Some of these, I don't know which ones, I don't pretend to know. Some of these, I think, were intentional decisions. And I absolutely believe that them trying to keep the fear stoked for as long as they did, with the mask mandates. Well, if you go outside and everybody's wearing masks, it of course enhances a atmosphere of fear. I really think they wanted to keep the fear going so that they could get everybody to take the vaccine. Whereas and honestly, if you look at the figures, yes, it was there were vulnerable people that it killed. I'm not saying it wasn't a nasty little infection. It certainly was for a lot of people. But really, it wasn't much worse than some bad flu seasons we've had. And those bad flu seasons aren't didn't make headlines over and over. They weren't the lead story on the news every night. If during the Hong Kong flu of I think 68 or 69, if national news had led every newscast showing you the rise in the death figures, people probably would have panicked. Uh, but the Hong Kong flu never really got more than like a page four story in national news. So the fact that the news kept pounding it home, pounding it home, pounding it home, exaggerating the risk to people. And I remember seeing a study that the more news people watched, the more news they watched, the more they overestimated, often wildly overestimated, how much risk they were at. I once again tend to think that kind of seems intentional to me. Honest journalists would have helped people to relax a little bit about it by letting them know, like me, like I said, I looked it up. My odds of dying, just given my demographics, 1 in 50,000. Well, my odds of dying from throat cancer as a non-smoker are about 1 in 50,000. So come on, I'm not going to run out and take an anti-throat cancer vaccine. I think it was intentional. I think at least part of it was to sell vaccines, was to try to sell vaccines. And I think also there was just kind of this sense that, too many people in the minds of the expert class who want to control us, too many people, are too in love with their own freedom and et cetera, et cetera. Let's scare the hell out of them and see if we can get them to give that freedom away. And there are always some people who will, but I'm pleased to say that a lot of people initially gave into the fear, but I know a lot of people who woke up, they came out of it.
Yeah, I do as well, and it just goes to show you. Well, I don't want to get too. I don't want to get bogged down in Canadian politics because, well, your guys' political situation is a lot more interesting right now. But Canadians don't learn. I don't know if you've been following the situation up here, but we just re-elected the Liberal Party again,
I
and it's
was
completely
quite surprised.
embarrassing.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's that's pretty much all I've been covering lately on my channel. So it's refreshing to have some different topics of conversation tonight. But yeah, no, the pendulum has swung back around for you guys because a lot of people indeed ended up waking up. And
Right.
I think Donald Trump owes a big debt of gratitude to Robert F. Kennedy and
Hmm.
like Tulsi Gabbard and people like
Hmm.
that. Like
Yep.
I said, I'm not an American, but I follow your guys' situation pretty closely. What are your thoughts on RFK?
Oh, I
RFK
think
Jr. That is obviously.
I think he's terrific. In fact, he had a fundraising event in Nashville. I live near Nashville, Tennessee. He had a fundraising event. This is when he was still planning to run as an independent. I went to it and I listened to his speech, and there were great entertainers there. Rob Schneider, Russell Brand. Uh, there are others I can't think of off the top of my
Sounds
head.
like quite a show.
It was very entertaining, and he came out and gave a speech. And again, I tend to lean libertarian. When he first announced he was running, I wasn't really interested because I heard Robert F. Kennedy, and I kind of said, okay, Kennedy family, Ted Kennedy. Now, John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy really, they were what I'd call old fashioned liberals.
Yeah.
They did believe in freedom. I mean, they wanted more government involvement than I would prefer in some things, but they also believed in freedom of thought, freedom of speech, et cetera, et cetera. Well, by the time Ted Kennedy got to be fairly old in the Senate, I wouldn't even call him liberal anymore. I just considered him more kind of left wing. As Dennis Prager likes to say, liberal and left wing are kind of used interchangeably, but old fashioned liberals were not the same as today's left wingers. But then I started watching long interviews with RFK Jr., hour-long interviews, including an interview by Reason Magazine, the libertarian magazine. And I thought, this guy's a lot more libertarian than I would have suspected. So I went to the fundraiser and I was seriously considering voting for him if he did run as an independent. I ultimately think we got the best possible result, which is him as HHS secretary, where he can focus his enormous energy and intellect on the problems he cares about most, as opposed to him also having to deal with congressional budgets, foreign policy, everything that a president has to deal with. So I know the media is going to. They're basically conducting a jihad against him right now because I don't know if this is true in Canada. It's certainly true in the U.S. Our media, most news organizations in the US now get at least 50% of their advertising dollars from Big Pharma.
Well, um, actually, in Canada, we do have some. Like we're a very like socialist oriented country. So like we
Right.
actually like to our credit, we do have some checks and balances about that. Like you won't see like brought to you by Pfizer before like every broadcast on our TV, but like most of the news that Canadians consume is government funded. Like most
So,
people watch CBC. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like one of the reasons our conservative, like a big talking point against like our conservative contender who almost won the election, but he couldn't get past the post. One of the big things they were throwing him under the bus for was he wanted to defund the CBC. He had this radical idea that like news organizations should stand by their own merit and
Right.
collect advertising revenue from everybody else, and if people want to watch them, they'll succeed. But no, our news here is very much propped up by the government. It's
Okay.
absolutely crazy how things work up here. But yeah.
Well, ours isn't propped up by the government, although we did find out when Musk and Doge were digging into funding that some news organizations were being supported by government because some government agency would just buy like 100,000 subscriptions or whatever. It's crazy. Never should have been done. But point being, our news organizations, for the most part, are not funded by government. But unfortunately, they have to a very large degree become funded by Big Pharma. CNN, I think it's like 75% of their revenue comes from Big Pharma. So our quote unquote news organizations have basically just become shills for Big Pharma. And I used to wonder, you'd see all these pharmaceutical advertisements on American television. Ask your doctor about this. Ask your doctor about that. And I used to think, come on, I don't get the point of this. Are people really going to sit home and they're watching Breaking Bad or whatever, and then they see, are they really going to go ask their doctor about this or that? It seems unlikely. Well, then I learned that's never been the purpose. The purpose was never to get people to ask your doctor about. The purpose was to buy up so much of the advertising space that the news organizations would become dependent on big pharma dollars and no longer report negative stories on them. And it worked. There's a wonderful book by Cheryl Atkinson, used to work for CBS, called Follow the Science. She was there when this happened because she used to be able to do stories on negative effects of drugs. And then when CBS, just like every other big news organization, became way too dependent on big pharma dollars, those stories started getting spiked. She couldn't do them anymore. It's part of the reason she left CBS.
Wow. I've never thought about that perspective before, but that makes a ton of sense. Uh,
Right.
and it doesn't really explain why, because Canadian journalists are just as spineless. Like I know
Yeah.
we don't rely on the advertising dollars from big pharma, but also everything we do as a country tends to mirror you guys anyways. We just do it a little bit more sloppily. So I don't know.
Right.
Maybe our journalists just follow your guys' lead, because I can assure you that journalistic approach to the COVID vaccine was the exact same up here. Like it was, you do not dare question it. Yeah.
Let me put it this way. I would be stunned if someone were able to do a deep, deep, unfettered investigation of Canadian politics and politicians. I would be stunned if big pharma dollars were not finding their way into your politicians' pockets.
Oh,
I
they
suspect they
absolutely
are.
are. They
Yeah,
absolutely are. Some great researchers have already done some pretty deep dives on this. So yeah,
yeah,
no, the liberal pockets are definitely lined, as are the conservatives. We
right,
didn't really have much of a strong opposition up here. Pierre Poilievre was our like conservative front runner who he didn't win, but no, he was like before Trump got in there, he was the Liberal Party under Justin Trudeau. Like, I'll give you the Cliff Notes version of it. Like, I think at one point he was slated to win 6 seats in our House of Commons. Like, they would have been decimated so badly they wouldn't have even had party status anymore. Like, the Conservatives were going to win a supermajority. And Pierre Poilievre he grew some balls after the pandemic had ended. You know, like once the Freedom Convoy had established themselves in Ottawa, he sort of came out of nowhere and was like, yeah, like I support these guys. And, you know, surprisingly, he didn't get thrown under the bus for it. Like, you know, the media tried to paint him as some sort of right wing extremist because he took a picture with some peaceful protesters holding a Canadian flag.
right,
But yeah, no, he was going to win until Donald Trump started his trade war. And then the Liberal Party and the legacy media here in Canada, they did, to their credit, they did the greatest PR stunt ever, where they basically just framed this entire thing as Pierre Poilievre didn't run an election against the Liberals. You know what I mean? Like the Liberals didn't have to run against our conservative candidate. They had to run against Donald Trump.
right.
They basically painted him as being just like Donald Trump, who apparently was going to take over our country.
Right.
People actually believe this. You know what I mean? Like, I know there's all that like 51st state talk, but like everybody knows that Donald Trump was just trolling.
Right.
Like, honestly, as an American who I'm just going to guess, like you lean right, do you want a giant snow California like voting on your federal election? I doubt it.
Yeah, he that's been Trump's style forever. He always, well, first off, I mean, he's always been kind of a blowhard. And second, he likes to say things that are controversial and he likes to get under people's skin. When he was talking about Canada becoming the 51st state, I knew it's like there's no way he even wants Canada to become the 51st state. And I think part of him doing that was him tweaking Trudeau, basically saying you're a governor, etc.
Yeah,
But
no, it was a
unfortunately,
troll.
Yeah, it was trolling. And unfortunately, a lot of people thought, oh my God, he's going to try to take over Canada. It's like, he doesn't want to take over Canada.
So, like, if I have Trump derangement syndrome about one issue, it was like, this is going to sound crazy, but I unironically believe that your president meddled in our election because we were set to have like an actual like real leadership in this country, and he like so many Canadians were just duped by the Liberal Party and the
Right.
media to throw their support behind a globalist banker named Mark Carney, who like
Yeah.
I don't want to get into it, but like if you follow him, he's he's been in England. He's been like running the Bank of England for the last decade. He was born in Canada, but like he's not a Canadian
Right.
as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. I mean, I don't, of course, follow it anywhere to the degree that you do, but sure. I mean, I was kind of aware of what happened and who that guy is. And you know what? These World Economic Forum globalist SOBs, I mean, it's just amazing how often they end up running some government here and
Absolutely.
there. And I don't think it's because people around the world have said, yes, I want a World Economic Forum globalist as my leader. It's just so much of the political game is rigged, and it's rigged to make sure they get in power.
100%. And like we saw it during COVID, but like to bring it back to what's going on with the food system,
Mm-hmm.
the World Economic Forum, it's just maybe a lot of people started noticing this during COVID because like we had a little bit more free time, but it seems like they've been on a path to demonize red meat
Oh, yeah,
specifically. Like
sure.
I did a quick little video on this a couple months back, but like, basically they've come out and said more than once that in the future when they're describing like, I think at one point they called it Agenda 2030, they said red meat will be a treat.
Right,
Meat will not be something you eat every day. It will be a treat. And now
right.
we see like beef prices are starting to rise, and I don't know about you, but I feel like this is another situation that is completely by design. I don't think it's a coincidence that they're, pushing eating bugs on people and, you
Oh,
know,
no, of course it's totally by design. It's totally by design. And all this stuff about, oh, meat causes climate change or global warming or whatever we're calling it this week. I mean, come on, absolute nonsense. But here's the thing. I'm a bit of a history buff too. People who have wanted to control other people for as long as there has been human history have always tried to push people into not eating much meat, into living on grains. That started originally because, in order to have a ruling and luxury class, you have to have people who pay taxes. When you are a society of hunters, you can't tax what people hunt, but you can tax grains because grains can be weighed, they grow above ground, you can't really hide them. And whenever a ruling class has wanted to take over, they have always pushed people, often by force, to become farmers so that they can grow grains, which can be taxed. And then the taxes support the ruling class. It supports the armies, the military that the ruling class uses to maintain power. So throughout human history, there's been a push to make people eat grains, not eat much meat, because hunters tend to be free people and hunters tend to be independent people. And there were many times throughout history when they would, historians will say this or that society collapsed. It wasn't a collapse, it was an escape. Quite often, people who had been forced into becoming farmers would just say they've had enough of basically being wage slaves for the ruling class, and they would basically revolt or just flat out in mass leave and go become hunters again. And then that society collapsed. So I think those kind of people, those ruling class wannabes, they've always been around. They probably always will be around, and we will always have to resist them.
wow. Yeah, the way you sum that up says it all, man. Absolutely. Um, yeah, like because there has been a push to demonize red meat. I don't
Yeah.
think it's just me that's been noticing that.
Oh no,
Um,
it's been around for a while.
yeah, but it just seems like maybe just during COVID I started paying attention to it more. But you just constantly see news reports, sometimes even ones that conflict each other, talking about all the different things that red meat does. You know,
Right.
one week it causes cancer, one
Right.
week it is bad for your heart, which is
Right.
absolutely ludicrous when you think
Yeah.
about like how much heart disease has been on the rise since we started eating low fat, high grain, high
Right.
sugar, all processed food diets. And
Right.
like, these problems didn't exist like you were talking about in the beginning with our grandparents' generation. And they would literally cook a pot roast every single day. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
they would survive on this stuff. Like,
Well, as someone once said, it was someone I came across when I was researching Fathead said, it's ludicrous to blame the diseases on civilization on the foods that humans ate before they were civilized, which would be hunting and meat. Yeah, I mean, when I was active on my blog for years, I looked at all kinds of studies on meat and cancer, heart disease, blah, blah, blah. And basically, what it gets down to is this. First, most of those studies are nonsense. They're what are called observational studies, meaning they didn't take some people and put them on a low meat diet and some on a high meat diet and track what they ate and follow them for 20 years. That would have been an actual study. These are what are called observational studies. We send out food surveys, which are ridiculous, and we ask people to tell us what they ate in the last month. I had to fill one out once when I was with some company that decided to participate. It's insane. Let me ask you, how many ounces of red meat did you eat last month?
oh, geez, I don't know. You're sort of putting me on the spot here. I could,
Exactly my
I
point,
don't
though.
know.
Exactly my point. That's what those surveys are like. And so most people don't know how many ounces of grain did you eat, how many servings of bread. Most people they don't know, so they guess. And then based on these wild guesses, they come up with these studies. Oh, people who reported eating more red meat have more cancer. Blah blah blah. Well, those are the ones that the media loves to hype. But for every one of those, and I found them, I put a bunch of them on my blog. There are other studies showing exactly the opposite. I came across, one of those types of studies where they concluded that men who eat more red meat have lower rates of heart disease and cancer. So in science, if it's not consistent, it's not valid. So what happens is they'll throw out all these studies out there, and some, the people who ate more red meat had a slightly higher rate of this or that gets published. The ones where the people who ate more red meat actually had a lower rate of this or that, we just pretend that one didn't exist. So those studies are all over the map, and there's absolutely no validity to the notion that people who eat more red meat are more likely to die of cancer or heart disease or any of that stuff. It was interesting. One thing I wrote about on my blog. So, Bill Clinton became a vegan at some point, but he was told by his vegan doctor not to eat white flour. And Clinton was photographed at some event eating a dinner roll. And the doctor fired him off a note saying, I will remind you, I've treated a lot of vegans for heart disease. Well, okay, if meat causes heart disease, why do vegans get it?
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
So they had to blame the little white dinner roll that he had.
Well, the fact was the doctor was right. If you're going to blame anything for heart disease, white flour is more likely to give it to you than a steak. So,
100%.
yeah.
One thing I did kind of want to ask you is this whole the gluten free thing, because gluten is like it's a guilty pleasure for a lot of people. That's like a
Mhm.
it's easy to cut out, if you're watching what you're doing, it's easy to cut out the high fructose corn syrup and
Mhm.
avoid sugar as much as you can. But like bread and pasta and stuff like that is just like so appealing to people.
Yeah.
What would you say? I know you mentioned like you try to stick to like a gluten free diet, correct?
For the most part, I was curious if I had celiac disease because not if I consume a little, but if I consume a big serving of, anything made of wheat, bread, pasta, etc., I tend not to feel great. So
That's
I
fair.
went
I
and
think
got
that's
tested.
for most people.
Yeah, and I went and got tested. Do I have celiac disease? And the answer was no. And I'm looking around because there's a wasp flying around in my office. Um, I don't have celiac disease, but I do seem to react not particularly well to those foods. So for me, well, first off, the wheat that we eat now is not the wheat that your grandparents ate, and certainly not the wheat of biblical times. There was a terrific book written by Dr. William Davis called Wheat Belly, where he explains that most of the wheat that's served around the world now is a strain that was only developed in either the late 70s, early 80s. It's called something like semi-dwarf wheat. It was developed by people who had good intentions. They were trying to prevent worldwide starvation, and they did, because this wheat grows something like 8 times as much per acre. But at no point when they were developing it did they test to see, does this have any negative health effects? And it kind of does. So when people say, well, I don't understand why I have bad reactions to wheat. My grandma ate pasta. My grandma ate bread. Your grandma was eating pasta and bread from a different kind of wheat.
Absolutely. Yeah, because it's a good point. Because, you look at countries like Italy, and one thing I will say about Fathead, I really like the way you open it up because you point out that, like, the obesity epidemic in America is sort of, it's overblown a little bit for
Right.
sure. But RFK he sort of makes the point that you were trying to dispel in the beginning of Fathead. Like RFK would say, like, oh, well, like back in my day in the 50s, you'd go to the beach and you wouldn't see fat people. And like you pointed out in Fathead that it was kind of hard for you to get a bunch of footage of like morbidly obese people. Like the
Right.
media likes to pretend that this is everywhere. But
Right.
regardless, I'm getting a little off track here. But what I meant to say was like you truly don't see that in Italy. You know what I mean? And like
Right.
they're a culture that eats a lot of grains. Like bread and pasta truly is a staple
Yeah,
over there, and like so they're obviously getting some different stuff than we are, right? Correct?
they are. It's a different kind of wheat. It's more of a more ancient wheat. It's not this stuff that was just created in the 80s, the semi-dwarf wheat. The other thing is they don't. I've talked to a lot of people who say, I went to Italy and I ate the pasta and I felt fine. I came back to America, I ate pasta, I felt terrible. Um, so I did some research on it. It's a different strain of wheat. Also, and I think this has something to do with it. Most of what they grow over there, they don't have atrazine and Roundup and all these other pesticides, you know, uh, in their weed supply. In America, they grow Roundup ready crops developed by Monsanto. Specifically, the seeds are sold by Monsanto. The Roundup is sold by Monsanto. So it may look the same sitting on the shelf, but it's not the same food. So, in fact, we spent part of our honeymoon in Italy. I ate some pizza. I ate some pasta. I didn't feel bad.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's different stuff.
It's funny you mentioned that because that's the only time I've ever been to Europe was me and my wife. We did our honeymoon in Italy. We
Yeah.
went to Rome and Florence. We had pizza and pasta the entire time. Uh, actually, most of the touristy areas we went, Prosecco was actually cheaper than bottled water. So we
Huh?
were drunk eating pizza and pasta the entire time and honestly felt great every day. But
Yeah.
yeah, that was our experience.
Yeah.
All right, Tom. I think that's as good a time as any to wrap, man. It's been an absolute honor to have you on the show tonight. I had a great conversation, and I hope everybody enjoys it out there. So, but before I hit the road, man, is there anything you want to plug? Do you want to let people know where they can find your work or anything that you're currently working on?
I'm not really doing any more films or anything. What I'm actually doing now is music. So if people want to just go search for my name, Tom Naughton, Naughton, on iTunes or Spotify, you will find some of my music. A lot of my songs have some humorous aspect to
That
them.
you know what? I'm looking down at my notes. That's one thing I didn't actually get to was Pharma Whores. That
Yeah.
song is absolutely hilarious, guys.
Oh, thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
so check out Tom Naughton on Spotify, and I will make sure to put a link to all of that stuff in the description. Go check out Pharma Whores, guys. It relates to what we were talking about with the COVID-19 vaccine.
Oh, and check out another one called Pill for Your Ill.
Pill for Your Ill.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Tom, thank you very much for coming on the show.
That was my pleasure. Good talking to you.
Great to talk to you. And that's my show for tonight, guys. I hope you enjoyed watching it just as much as I enjoyed making it. It was an absolute blast to have Tom on the show. So I'd like to remind you guys, if you haven't seen Fathead the movie, I strongly suggest you check it out. Let me know what you think down in the comments. And as always, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
From the shot, who cares? We're millionaires.